My friends, I want to tell you about a Sunday afternoon in my early 70s when my own doctor asked me a question that stopped me completely. A question I did not expect and could not immediately answer with any real honesty. She had just finished reviewing my chart, noting my persistently elevated blood pressure, my ongoing sleep difficulties, and a general pattern of exhaustion that no amount of rest seemed capable of resolving. Rather than simply adjusting my medication as I expected, she set down her pen, looked at me directly, and asked when I had last told someone no to a request I genuinely did not have the capacity to fulfill. I sat there in her office, genuinely searching my memory, and I could not locate a single clear instance in recent years. Not one. I had said yes to every request from my adult children, every invitation from extended family, every ask from my church community, every favor requested by neighbors and old colleagues, regardless of my own actual capacity or genuine desire to fulfill any particular request. I had told myself, for decades, that this consistent yes reflected generosity and good character, a devoted father and community member simply doing what devoted fathers and community members do. My doctor's simple question revealed something I had never allowed myself to examine honestly. This was not generosity. This was something considerably more complicated, and considerably more dangerous to my own health, than I had ever permitted myself to consider. I spent the following 2 years in honest, often uncomfortable self-examination, working first with my doctor and later with a counselor, trying to understand why saying a simple word, a word every small child learns to say quite easily and quite often, had become genuinely impossible for me across an entire adult lifetime. What I eventually discovered was not a simple habit of excessive kindness, as I had always assumed, but something rooted considerably deeper, a fear that had been quietly, invisibly governing nearly every significant decision of my adult life without my ever recognizing its actual presence, or its actual cost. I want to be honest that the word dangerous, in the title of this reflection, is not one I choose lightly or for the sake of dramatic effect. I use it because I genuinely came to believe, through my own doctor's careful review of my medical history alongside my own honest self-examination, that this particular pattern carries real, measurable danger to physical health through chronic stress and elevated blood pressure, danger to the authenticity of cherished relationships slowly eroded by unacknowledged resentment, and danger to one's own sense of self, gradually obscured across decades by a nervous system perpetually oriented toward everyone else's needs rather than one's own. This is not, I came to understand, a gentle personality quirk deserving only mild, affectionate teasing from friends and family. It is a genuine pattern with genuine costs, deserving the same serious attention we would give to any other threat to our health and well-being. Today I want to share with you what I discovered during those 2 years, because I believe this particular pattern, and the genuinely dangerous reason underlying it, affects far more people my age than most of us have ever honestly acknowledged, even to ourselves. This is not a lesson suggesting you should become unkind, unhelpful, or withdrawn from the people who genuinely need you. It is a lesson about understanding the actual mechanism driving a chronic inability to decline requests, a mechanism considerably more dangerous, both to your physical health and to your genuine relationships, than simple generosity ever could be. The single insight underlying everything I am about to share is this: the inability to say no rarely stems from genuine generosity. It stems, in the vast majority of cases, from an old, deeply buried fear that saying no will cause the people you depend on to withdraw their love, and this fear, left unexamined, can genuinely endanger both your health and the authenticity of every relationship it quietly governs. For most of my life, I believed my constant yes reflected admirable character. I finally understood, through considerable difficult reflection, that it actually reflected an old, largely unconscious survival strategy, developed decades earlier and never once properly examined, a strategy built on the deeply held belief that my own acceptability to others depended entirely on my continuous usefulness and agreeableness to them. Everything that follows is simply this one dangerous mechanism, appearing across the many different rooms of my life where it had quietly been operating for decades. The first place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in tracing its actual origin, which my counselor helped me identify as rooted in my own childhood home, where my mother's affection had felt genuinely conditional on my usefulness and compliance. I recalled, once I finally examined this honestly, a childhood in which expressing my own genuine preferences or declining a parental request reliably produced a withdrawal of warmth that felt, to a young child, genuinely dangerous and destabilizing. This early experience, I came to understand, had installed a deep, largely unconscious equation between saying no and losing love, an equation that continued operating throughout my entire adult life despite having no genuine basis in most of my actual adult relationships. The second place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in the specific physical symptoms my body had developed across decades of chronic, unexamined overcommitment. My persistently elevated blood pressure, my disrupted sleep, a general pattern of chronic low-grade exhaustion, all of these, my doctor eventually helped me understand, were direct physical consequences of a nervous system that had spent decades in a low-grade, near-constant state of anxious vigilance, perpetually monitoring for any request I might need to fulfill in order to avoid the imagined danger of someone's disapproval or withdrawal. The third place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in my relationship with my own adult children, where my inability to decline their requests had inadvertently taught them to expect unlimited availability from me regardless of my actual capacity. I recognized, examining this pattern honestly, that my own fear-driven yes across many years had shaped an entire family dynamic in which my limits were rarely if ever tested or respected, simply because I had never once demonstrated that genuine limits actually existed, a dynamic that ultimately served neither my own well-being nor, I eventually came to believe, my children's own genuine development of independence and self-sufficiency. The fourth place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in a pattern of quiet, unacknowledged resentment that had accumulated across decades toward the very people whose requests I had never once declined. I discovered, in my own honest self-examination, a considerable reservoir of resentment toward family members and friends I genuinely loved, resentment I had never permitted myself to consciously acknowledge because I had always framed my own consistent yes as freely chosen generosity rather than fear-driven compulsion, making the resulting resentment feel, when I finally admitted its existence, deeply confusing and difficult to reconcile with my own self-image as a genuinely generous person. The fifth place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in my genuine inability to identify my own authentic preferences in situations where my fear-driven yes had operated so automatically and for so long that I had lost meaningful contact with what I myself actually wanted. When my counselor asked me directly, during one of our early sessions, what I genuinely wanted from a particular family situation currently causing me considerable stress, I discovered, with real discomfort, that I could not immediately answer, having spent so many decades automatically calculating what others required of me that my own genuine preferences had become genuinely obscured, even to myself. The sixth place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in a pattern of physical and emotional depletion that consistently left me unable to be genuinely present for the people I loved most, precisely because I had already exhausted my available reserves fulfilling requests from people whose disapproval I unconsciously feared considerably more. I recognized that my own children and closest friends frequently received a depleted, distracted version of my attention, not because I loved them less, but because I had already spent the bulk of my genuine energy fulfilling requests from more distant relationships governed by this same old fear of disapproval, a fear that, paradoxically, often carried more unconscious weight than my genuine love for the people closest to me. The seventh place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in a pattern of physical illness that occurred, with striking regularity, immediately following periods of particularly intense overcommitment, a pattern my doctor eventually helped me recognize as considerably more than mere coincidence. I discovered, reviewing my own medical history honestly alongside my doctor, that my most significant health crises across several decades had consistently followed closely behind periods of the most extreme, fear-driven overcommitment, suggesting a genuine physiological cost to this pattern considerably more direct and dangerous than I had ever previously appreciated. The eighth place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in a persistent difficulty distinguishing between requests that reflected genuine need from people I loved and requests that reflected simple, casual convenience for people whose actual investment in the relationship was considerably more limited than my own fear-driven response to their requests suggested. I recognized, examining specific instances honestly, that I had responded with identical urgency and self-sacrifice to a genuine family emergency and to a casual acquaintance's minor scheduling inconvenience, an inability to distinguish these vastly different situations that reflected, I came to understand, a fear response operating indiscriminately rather than any genuine, considered assessment of actual need or relationship investment. The ninth place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in a pattern of anticipatory anxiety that began the moment I sensed someone might be about to make a request of me, well before the actual request had even been voiced. I noticed, once I began paying closer attention, a familiar tightening in my chest whenever a phone rang unexpectedly or a family member began a conversation with a particular tentative tone, an anticipatory dread that reflected, I eventually understood, an entire nervous system braced for the perceived danger of an incoming request I would once again feel unable to decline. The 10th place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in a genuine grief I eventually allowed myself to feel for the decades of my own authentic life that this fear had quietly consumed, decades I could never fully recover regardless of whatever change I might still manage to practice going forward. Allowing myself to genuinely grieve this loss, rather than continuing to minimize or dismiss it as simply the reasonable cost of a generous life, became an essential and considerably uncomfortable step in finally beginning to address the underlying fear directly, rather than continuing to treat its many symptoms individually without ever confronting the actual mechanism producing them. The 11th place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in how differently my body responded, physically and immediately, to genuinely voluntary generosity compared to fear-driven compliance, a distinction I had never previously recognized until I began deliberately comparing the two directly. I discovered, through careful attention, that requests I genuinely wanted to fulfill produced a distinctly different physical sensation, a warmth and ease, compared to requests I fulfilled purely out of old, fear-driven habit, which produced instead a persistent, low-grade physical tension that I had simply lived with for so many decades that I had stopped consciously noticing its presence at all. The 12th place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in recognizing that my own mother, whose early conditional affection had originally installed this fear in me, had likely been operating from an identical fear installed in her by her own parents decades earlier, a generational pattern I had never previously considered. This recognition arrived with a considerable measure of compassion I had not expected to feel, understanding that my own mother had likely been passing along, entirely unconsciously, a survival pattern she herself had absorbed from her own difficult childhood, rather than deliberately choosing to instill this particular fear in me through any genuine malice or intention. The 13th place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in a pattern of choosing friendships and romantic relationships, across my entire adult life, with people who unconsciously reinforced rather than challenged this old fear, gravitating toward partners and friends who expected considerable accommodation without ever needing to ask for it directly. I recognized, examining my own relationship history honestly, that I had consistently been drawn toward people whose personalities and expectations closely mirrored the conditional affection I had first experienced in childhood, a pattern that felt, at the time, like simple compatibility, but that I eventually understood as an unconscious recreation of exactly the dynamic that had first taught me to fear declining any request at all. The 14th place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in a specific physical sensation of genuine relief, considerably stronger than I expected, the very first time I successfully declined a significant request purely out of my own genuine limits rather than continuing my old pattern of automatic compliance. I recall this particular moment vividly, declining a request from a distant cousin to help coordinate an elaborate family event during a period when my own health genuinely required rest, and the physical sensation that followed my simple, calm decline was not the anticipated disaster my old fear had always predicted, but instead an immediate, almost startling wave of genuine relief that told me, more convincingly than any amount of counseling ever could, that the old imagined danger had never actually been real to begin with. The 15th place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in noticing how frequently my fear-driven yes had actually produced worse outcomes for the people I was trying to help than a genuine, honest no would have, since exhausted, resentful assistance rarely served anyone nearly as well as either a wholehearted yes or an honest, clearly stated no. I recognized, reviewing several specific instances honestly, that my fear-driven agreement to help with tasks I genuinely lacked the capacity or desire to complete well had frequently produced mediocre, resentfully executed assistance that served the requesting party considerably less well than an honest decline, which would have at least allowed them to seek help elsewhere from someone genuinely willing and able to assist wholeheartedly. The 16th place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in a persistent difficulty even recognizing, in the moment, that I actually possessed a genuine choice about how to respond to a given request, since the fear-driven yes had operated so automatically and for so many decades that it rarely registered, in the moment, as a choice being made at all. My counselor helped me understand that this particular blindness to my own agency was itself one of the clearest signs of how deeply this fear-driven pattern had become embedded, operating below the level of conscious decision-making entirely, functioning less like a considered choice and more like an automatic, reflexive response indistinguishable, in the moment, from genuine instinct. The 17th place this dangerous mechanism revealed itself was in noticing that people who genuinely loved me well, once I finally began practicing an occasional honest no, generally responded with considerably more respect and understanding than my old fear had ever predicted, while people whose reactions genuinely confirmed my old fears about conditional acceptance revealed themselves, through this simple test, to be relationships that likely deserved considerably less of my anxious, unlimited accommodation in the first place. This particular discovery proved genuinely clarifying, allowing me to distinguish, through direct, honest testing rather than continued anxious speculation, between relationships secure enough to withstand my genuine limits and relationships whose apparent closeness had, in truth, always depended on my continued fear-driven compliance rather than any genuine mutual regard. And the 18th and final form this dangerous insight takes, the one that ties every other form together, is simply this: every single yes I gave out of fear rather than genuine choice was a yes given to my own continued survival of an old, imagined danger, not a yes given to the actual person standing in front of me, and recognizing this distinction clearly is the beginning of finally learning to offer a genuine yes. Freely chosen, rather than a fear-driven yes, compulsively extracted. For most of my life, I believed every yes I offered reflected my genuine care for the person requesting it. I finally understood, through considerable difficult examination, that a great many of these yes had actually been offered to an old, internal fear rather than to the actual person and their actual, genuine need, a distinction that, once recognized clearly, finally allowed me to begin offering a yes that meant considerably more, precisely because it had finally become genuinely optional. My friends, I want to be honest with you that recognizing this dangerous mechanism did not immediately transform my ability to say no, and I want to be equally honest that I still, even now, occasionally feel the old familiar fear rising when I consider declining a request from someone whose approval I have spent decades unconsciously depending upon. What has changed is not that this fear has disappeared entirely, but that I now recognize it clearly the moment it arises, understanding it as an old, largely obsolete survival strategy rather than an accurate signal about genuine present danger, a recognition that has allowed me, gradually and with considerable ongoing practice, to begin choosing my responses more freely rather than remaining permanently governed by an old fear installed in circumstances that bear very little resemblance to my actual adult life and relationships today. I think often of that Sunday afternoon in my doctor's office, and how genuinely stunned I was by my own inability to locate even a single recent instance of having said no to something I did not have the genuine capacity to fulfill. I have come to believe that this particular blindness, the genuine inability to even recall practicing this simple word, is itself one of the clearest signs that a fear-driven mechanism, rather than genuine ongoing choice, has been quietly governing this particular area of your life, precisely because genuine choice, exercised freely, naturally produces at least some occasional instances of a freely chosen no, while fear-driven compulsion produces, as it had for me across many decades, an unbroken, exhausting record of yes. I want to share one further reflection before we close, something my counselor said to me during one of our final sessions that I have carried with me ever since. She told me that the goal of this particular work was never to transform me into someone who says no constantly or reflexively, replacing one automatic pattern with its opposite extreme. The goal, she said, was simply to restore genuine choice to a decision that had never actually felt like a choice at all, allowing me to say yes when I genuinely wanted to, and no when I genuinely needed to, guided by an honest assessment of my own actual capacity and desire rather than an old, largely obsolete fear operating entirely outside my conscious awareness. This distinction, between restoring genuine choice and simply adopting a new automatic pattern, has remained one of the most important insights I carried forward from this entire period of difficult, honest self-examination. If you are watching this today and you recognize, in your own life, This same genuine difficulty locating any recent instance of having declined a request you did not have the capacity to fulfill, I want you to gently consider whether the underlying reason might be considerably more complicated, and considerably more dangerous to your own health and the authenticity of your relationships, than simple generosity alone could ever explain. This particular pattern, left unexamined, carries a genuine cost, both to your physical health, as my own doctor helped me understand directly through my own medical history, and to the authenticity of every relationship this old fear continues to quietly govern from behind the scenes. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I hope something I shared helps you recognize your own particular version of this dangerous mechanism, and gives you the courage to begin examining it honestly, with a doctor, a counselor, or simply through your own careful, patient reflection. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Notice the old fear when it rises, and gently, patiently, practice distinguishing it from genuine present danger. And trust that the yes you eventually learn to offer freely, having finally released the old fear driving so many decades of compulsory agreement, will mean considerably more, both to you and to the people who receive it, than any fear-driven yes ever could. Until next time, this has been Eternal Flame Wisdom. Stay honest, stay gently curious about your own old fears, and remember, a yes given freely is a genuine gift, but a yes given only out of fear was never actually a gift at all. Thank you for watching.